Hello everyone and welcome to New Ways of Teaching and BBEL Professional Development webinar series for English teachers. English language teaching and learning is changing. But what do these changes mean for teachers? And where can teachers go for help with professional development? They can go to New Ways of Teaching, of course. So what is New Ways of Teaching? New Ways of Teaching is a British Council program that promotes teacher training and support to the educator communities throughout the Americas region. With what's here on the screen, with tips, video tips, infographics, the teaching tips with practical ideas for the teacher to implement in the classroom with key topics like motivating students, gender equality, teaching via YouTube, etc. There are also research papers with very interesting information about what's the role of the teacher today and the new skills the teachers got to have. There are also documentaries, downloadable materials, and of course, podcasts. We are launching the first podcast today. The aim of the British Council is to support English language teachers, providing them with all the necessary resources to cope with the crisis and constant changes in education. But what's the purpose of this first webinar? This is the first webinar of a series of webinars, and our objective today is to provide information about the different new ways of teaching in the Americas with guests from Peru, Mexico, Colombia, and they will also offer practical tips on different topics shared by the roundtable of experts. So let me just mention the roundtable of experts we have today: Nick Perkins, Liliana Sanchez, Denise Valenzuela, and Ralph Grayson. We invite you to stay with us to the end of this webinar to get a link to a certificate of attendance. We strongly recommend you sign up for the newsletter, for New Ways of Teaching newsletter, to receive more tips directly into your inbox. So sign up. There's a link that will be shared in the chat by our moderator in the chat, Graham Stanley, who will be sharing several links all along this webinar. You will be receiving information about the next podcast that will be published in a month, for example. Another thing we want to share with you is save the following dates for the coming webinars. At the end of August, the topic is working with intercultural communities of teachers. End of September, the benefits of teacher development for your daily work and career plans. End of October, climate change in English language education. End of November, remote teaching, online learning. And mid-December, because end of December you'll be all celebrating, is gender in English language education. In 2022, so January, it's the BBEL conference. A link to the events calendar will be shared in the chat. All of these events will take place at 3 p.m. Peru, Mexico time. So without further ado, let's introduce our first guest today. Our first guest is Nick Perkins. He's produced all the podcasts for New Ways of Teaching in 3 languages, Spanish, English, and Portuguese. Nick has worked in education, publishing, and broadcasting for over 20 years. He has taught English, managed and trained teachers, written and edited materials, and implemented curricular reform projects all over the world. And he has hosted a live weekly urban music radio show on UN Radio 98.5 FM for many years. Music lovers. Nick lives in Bogota and spends his free time cycling in the Colombian mountains. He recently produced the series of podcasts for New Ways of Teaching, and he interviewed educators, teachers, school leaders, and policymakers from all Latin America about innovative solutions in education. Welcome, Nick. We have a first question for you, Nick. And the first question is, after interviewing all these people, is what is your impression of the new ways of teaching happening in the region after all the interviews for podcast you have conducted?
That's a really good question, Alicia. And I think when you told me that this was going to be the topic of conversation, I had another look at the podcast recordings, another listen to the podcast recordings. And I think there are a couple of takeaways for me, two sort of general themes. One is that the digital divide is a huge issue across the Americas. I started recording the interviews and producing the first podcasts in December last year, and the recordings ran through to almost to May this year. So obviously at the beginning, the pandemic and the way that education had to adapt itself to the pandemic was very much at the top of people's minds. So a lot of what they were talking about were issues that they had to deal with within their projects to cope with the pandemic. And again and again and again, whether we were looking at gender equality, whether we were looking at inclusion in education, whether we were looking at safeguarding or any of the other issues that we explore in the podcasts, the digital divide was at the forefront of the challenges that educators were having to face to be able to support their students. And I don't think we really reached any solutions in terms of closing the divide for the students themselves. But what you will hear in the podcast are some really interesting ideas from teachers that jump through hoops to engage parents and ensure that, most parents had a cell phone, for example. So the teachers were then supporting the students through their parents' cell phone via WhatsApp. I don't know what we'd do without WhatsApp. Everybody mentioned WhatsApp as the tool that had enabled them to reach their students in these really difficult times. So that, I think, is a huge issue, and something at a sort of multilateral organizational level is really important to be looking at. How can we provide people with access to the digital world to enable them themselves, rather than having to jump through these hoops to participate in education? And that led us into, in many conversations, inclusion was a real issue, whether it was inclusion of diverse populations, inclusion of people with special needs, inclusion of multiple gender identities is a huge challenge in education. And educators spoke a lot about the efforts that they've been making to overcome certain cultural stereotypes and cultural barriers to inclusion. And I think you'll probably find very interesting, I think all of the podcasts were really interesting. But one that I found particularly interesting was Mercedes Viola from Uruguay, who was talking about special needs and has some great ideas on how to incorporate students with special needs into mainstream education. And yeah, I did ask her the question of, sort of how isn't this a challenge? And so why would it be? There's so much diversity, and once you start including people, it opens the door to a huge world of new possibilities in your classroom. She had a really beautiful way of describing how to approach inclusion. I think that's that one I'm looking forward to hearing when it's published. And I think my second to last comment would be based around something which becomes very clear as you listen to the podcast is a lot of people are working individually. And I think it's great that the British Council designs initiatives like New Ways of Teaching, because what I hope happens is as people start to watch the videos, read the articles, listen to the podcasts, they will hear others who are doing similar work to them. And then we can start looking at forming networks and making the most of all of these different individual experiences that I was hearing people talking about as being personal challenges, and we can hopefully make these into challenges which are resolved by a larger group of people. And there are many similarities across the Americas. Every country is different, obviously. Every region of every country is different. But if we can look for the similarities and look at who's doing this amazing work and put these people together, hopefully we can achieve even greater things in the future. So I'm really looking forward to seeing as well where New Ways of Teaching actually goes. I mean, this is the start. Where does it end? Hopefully never. And the very last thing which is linked to that is that teachers are ingenious. What you'll hear in the podcasts are people who have had to invent things that they never expected to have to invent in situations that they never expected to have to confront. And it's really refreshing, it's inspiring to hear how they did it. And the fact that without any extra money for themselves, much less for resources, without any extra time in the day, you know, we still had the same 24 hours a day, and some of them seem to have been working all 24. They were able to achieve quite amazing things, and I think it's a real testimony to the dedication and the vocation of the people who I spoke to. And lastly, thank you very much for inviting me. I hope that people here are inspired to look at the New Ways of Teaching website and look at all of the different resources. And I really look forward to answering any questions you have. I see my emails up on the screen. Feel free to get hold of me direct, put your questions in the chat, or get hold of your local British Council office, and we will be happy to help.
Thank you, Nick. There is a second question, but you have already kind of answered it. It is if it's any tip or information you found particularly interesting. You mentioned Mercedes Viola's podcast on inclusion, which is in Spanish, and it's that's very interesting. And any other particular information or thing you found interesting that you want to share with the audience today?
Yeah, I think I hope that this is fairly obvious to most people, but I think it's worth mentioning because a lot of teachers are fearful of giving their personal information to parents, understandably. You know, we are employed to do a job during a certain period of time in the day. And I think the fear is that if I give my personal information to parents, then my day will never end. And I think at the beginning of the pandemic was what led teachers to have to do this. And now that they've done it, I think at the beginning, what people were expressing was this sort of trepidation, you know, what's going to happen? Am I ever going to be able to rest? And what people soon realized, and this would be the obvious tip, is set really clear ground rules and stick to them. So I am available from this time to that time. And if you contact me outside those times, I will not answer. You know, I'm not being rude, but please don't insist. I will answer you during my working hours. And what teachers were telling me is once they'd done that, parents were really respectful, and the students who had access to direct to their teachers were very respectful of this because they knew what the ground rules were. So I think that would be my tip. Don't wait for the next pandemic to share your details with parents and students. Do it now, but with clear ground rules.
That's great, Nick. Thank you very much. And the reason we have Nick today is because we are launching the first podcast, and a link to the first podcast is going to be shared in the chat, which is in the New Ways of Teaching landing page. So thank you very much, Nick, again. It's been great having you. It's been great also being interviewed by you. So thanks again. Now,
thank you.
Now let's introduce our second guest today. Her name is Liliana Sanchez. Liliana is the program lead for the Remote Teaching Center at British Council Argentina, with focus on Plan Ceibal, Uruguay. She's a Cambridge English Language Assessment Delta Module 3 assessor and regular speaker at national and international ELT conferences such as BBELT, MEX-TESOL, LAPSI, and IATEFL. Liliana has worked in education management, course and materials design, the standardization of assessment and criteria validation of training programs, counseling and coaching of ELT professionals, provision of academic solutions, and tailor-made academic services. Liliana holds an MA in TESOL from Canterbury Christ Church University in UK, and her main interests are research, teacher education, and leadership. So we want to welcome Liliana to our roundtable today. Hi, Liliana.
Hi, thank you, Alicia. Glad to be here.
Great, Liliana, as the lead of the Remote Teaching Center in Argentina, an expert in professional development, what was learned from emergency remote teaching? What stayed? And what do teachers need today? It's a huge question. Over to you.
Okay, thank you very much, Alicia. Well, it's a very interesting question for us at the Remote Teaching Center Argentina. We call it the RTC, because what the emergency did for us was to validate our work. In other words, we were already doing remote teaching when this became the most viable alternative to teaching at a distance. However, even us at the RTC have learned a lot about the emergency situation worldwide. For the benefit of the audience, I would like to give a little bit of context about the RTC. For our center and teachers, remote teaching is the norm. Remote teachers deliver lessons to children in public primary schools in Uruguay via live online teaching. This is what we do. This is what we are experts at. But due to the contingency, we had to change the model and to deliver lessons remotely, but to groups of students who were no longer together in the same classroom, and who in many cases did not have connectivity or still do not have connectivity at home. So that has been one of the greatest challenges. So in the light of that, I can say that one of the toughest lessons that we teachers, and I count myself as one of them, have had is to adapt to the new, or really to the unknown learning contexts. And to do this, we have to do it as quickly and as efficiently as possible. And I believe this is true for all the teachers, whether already used to remote teaching or distant teaching or not. Nika spoke of, creativity, and how teachers had to be quite inventive to find solutions. And this is it. This is what it relates to. Adaptability to the new context, completely unknown to many teachers, even to remote teachers. As I said, we were used to one model and suddenly the students were not in the same classroom. Suddenly the remote teachers were not in their teaching points, in the safe, environment of the RTC, the Remote Teaching Center. So these lessons that we have learned are more evident in lesson planning. And this is my belief as a teacher trainer, because what I have heard from our teachers and from many other teachers in training is that now teachers have to consider not only the group and individual needs of learners, but now they have to consider them in the new environment. What does this mean? In a face-to-face environment, teachers are always alert to the different signs that students send, the verbal and the non-verbal messages, the body language, and we respond to them immediately. We incorporate quiet learners to group work. We do a bit of micro-teaching while other learners are working independently at a different pace. We manage time, compensate as we see fit. We even divert from the lesson plan to the point that at times we abandon it. And it's fine, because we find other opportunities to adapt in following lessons. But in the live online environment, not all of this is possible. And so lesson planning takes a new level of relevance. For example, class management in the online environment is to be much more effectively planned and implemented. In face-to-face teaching, for example, we anticipate problems and think of viable solutions, with language, content, and materials. At times, solutions are implemented quite organically with resources we have at hand in the classroom. We improvise, But in the online environment, we have to be over-prepared for all this. We have to know which tools we have available and that we feel comfortable using. We have to address problems quite assertively and effectively. And we have to do all this in open class, because you cannot always address individual learners' needs. And this is simply because the camera is on and is open to everybody in the classroom. So we also need to be aware of problems with connectivity and IT skills of both students and teachers. So as you see, we've learned a lot, even remote teachers, experienced remote teachers. And now just say, what has to stay or will stay? In my opinion, one of the greatest lessons has been collaboration, knowing that I can turn to a colleague at a distance for help, and that there will be at least a word of support in what we're doing. So I would like to invite teachers to join communities of practice, any group of discussion where ELT topics are discussed. We teachers need to be part of these forums and discussion groups, because we need to be able to talk about, you know, our new ideas, but also our old favorites, adapted to the new learning environments. We need our ideas to be challenged and enriched by the input of others. So in general, we need to know that we are not alone in this, and that even when things don't work, we're trying, and somebody may have tried it before and could give us some guidance into this. So I think this is what will prevail, the community that we have created. And finally, I mean, what is it that teachers need? I think we all need ideas that work, and that work in the face-to-face and in the online environment. And preferably that these ideas are based on evidence. We need support from our peers. We need opportunities for development, because there's nothing worse for teachers than going through a period of change, particularly like the strenuous experiences we have been through, and come out without some learnings. I heard somewhere, read it somewhere, probably somebody knows the quote, but it was something like teaching is only second to learning. And that's the spirit of teachers, you know, we really want to learn. So.
Thank you, Liliana. That's very inspiring indeed. Already lots of ideas and useful and practical ideas, which takes us to our second. Well, this is Liliana's email that you can reach her and get in touch with her. And the second question is, can you recommend, you've already given lots of tips, but can you recommend a tip from New Ways of Teaching? In this case, it's lesson planning for teaching live online, which the link will be shared in the chat.
Yes, thank you, Alicia. I think this is tip number 7. So why I like it is because of what I was saying, you know, lesson planning has to be much more the focus of attention for us in the new environment, in the online environment. I like this tip a lot because we already know and have established, Nick also said it, about the face-to-face and online environment and how they are different. There's a divide, although not very clear, it's there. And it has been discussed quite widely in various forums. We also know that we cannot just transfer the lesson planning skills of face-to-face classes to online. In fact, in most cases, we have to start from scratch, and that's the recommendation. So I like this tip because it gives us ideas. In fact, it starts with a checklist that I liked a lot, because it has got questions that trigger a lot of reflection about planning in the new environment, in the online environment. So to think about the outcomes, the resources available, which was also something that Nick was mentioning, you know, what is it that we have? Let's not try to plan something that we cannot deliver. You know, ask us to think about timing and activities and all that. But what I really liked is that in the tip, at some point, we have got very practical ideas for each of the stages of a lesson. That's what I really like this tip, and I hope that teachers find it as useful as I have.
I'm sure they will, Liliana. Thank you very much for so many wonderful ideas that come from experience and expertise. Thanks again.
Thank you.
Now, let's introduce our next speaker at the roundtable, who is Denise Valenzuela. Denise Valenzuela is an experienced project manager in the education sector. She has worked in international education, ELT, and teacher training programs. She has focused on English teacher continuous professional development through her work. She has influenced education systems in Mexico and have impacted more than 10,000 English teachers in the public sector and almost 1 million Mexican students from the basic education in Mexico. So welcome, Denise, to this roundtable, and thanks for joining us.
Thank you very much, Alicia, for inviting me.
Well, it's good to have you here to talk about the Mexican new ways of teaching, how teachers reacted to these changes. So the first question for you is, how are Mexican teachers becoming aware of new ways of teaching? And what skills do teachers need today to teach remotely?
Perfect. Thank you very much, Alicia. I think before starting, I would like to start by giving you a little bit more background about Mexico, okay? So you can understand much better, because if you're joining from Chile, if you're joining from Argentina, you can be aware of what's the context for Mexico. And if you're from Mexico, please send us a greeting. So in 2020, when everything started, I think we didn't know what COVID was, you know? We weren't prepared for this, as Nick and Liliana were mentioning. We weren't know what was expecting from us. So as teachers, we were not prepared for leaving the classroom, the face-to-face classes. We were very used to the face-to-face model. So we lacked of digital skills from English teachers, and this is something that is continue happening. And here in Mexico, most of the teachers didn't receive a proper training and neither receive resources to help them for this move to a digital environment. And as you know, Mexico is one of the biggest countries in the Americas, and one of the biggest countries. We have a lot of variation regarding socioeconomical progress in all the communities. So teachers have faced different realities in the north, in the south, or in the center of Mexico. So to contextualize you, according to the National Institute of Statistics and Geography in Mexico, 76% of the total population who live in a urban area have access to internet, while in contrast, 47% of the people who live in rural areas have access to internet access. And as you can see, most of the students who join to virtual or remote sessions in Mexico join through a smartphone. So as you can see, this is a disadvantage for many students. So this affects the teachers, of course, because they have to face different realities. I would like to tell you like three very simple examples about this, but we have the example one, like you're a teacher who teaches in a remote place in Mexico, and most of your students don't have access to internet. So you have to consider new ways of teaching to approach them. In another example, probably you teach in Mexico City, but you teach in one of the most vulnerable places in the city, and you find out that most of your students have dropped out because they have to work and they have to help their parents in their work in the small businesses. So this is a reality in Mexico, and I'm pretty sure that it's a reality in many of the countries in Latin America. And a third case is probably you are very lucky because you work in a private school, and probably most of your students have a smartphone, a laptop, a tablet, and they have very good technological skills. So as you can see, inequity will affect your role as a teacher. I'm pretty sure that all the teachers who are connected right now have faced many of these situations. So to answer your questions, how are Mexican teachers becoming aware of the new ways of teaching? I would say the first one, it's something that they need. It's something that they have to develop, because otherwise they are not part of the learning evolution that we are living right now. So I would say that teachers are becoming aware of the new ways of teaching by number one, becoming observers and reflective, because they have to be aware of the student's circumstance. As I mentioned before, they have to be aware of the local context. They have to be aware of the skills that they need to develop in order to help their students. Another way that they have developed new ways of teaching is by being autonomous. They have been working on their continuous professional development, or CPD. They have detected a weakness and they have to do things to tackle it. How do they do that? By thousands of free resources, trainings, as tools, as the tools that the British Council offer, actually. Another way that they have found new ways of teaching is by being creative. And I think this is very important, Alicia, because creative is not connected to being technological. So I would like to give you here again, I'm sorry, I like to give a lot of examples, three very beautiful examples that I found here in Mexico. So to let you know, or to share with you, that creativity is away from technology. So here in a training that we were developing in the state of Guanajuato, one of our participants in the British Council training, she mentioned that most of her students didn't have access to internet. Actually, they didn't have access to basic services as potable water. So what she was doing in order to try to help those students were like leaving photocopies of the today's subject, leaving photocopies of the homework or the assignments for the students in local stores near to the places where the students live. Local stores like convenience stores, tortillerias, so the students can pick up those sheets and they can take it home and then give it back to the teacher in the same way. So that is a very beautiful. The second one, which is very good as well, is I'm going to be very quickly. It's a teacher who used his car, who lives in a small town, and used his car by driving, and he drives all around his town using a big speaker and delivering the class through the speaker to his students. And lastly, the final example is that teachers, as Nick was mentioning, use the WhatsApp for communicating with their students, for providing the sessions, for providing homework, assignments, etc. So another way that teachers have found for new ways of teaching is, as Liliana mentioned, join interest groups, working with colleagues, joining online interest groups. So I think, as Liliana mentioned, I will invite you to do that. So these are the new ways of teaching that teachers have found during these pandemic times. But I will have to say that probably what I have found what I have heard about right now with Nick and Liliana is that teachers probably haven't focused on their well-being and neither their mental health, and this is very important as well.
This brings us to our next question, because you're very particularly interested in teachers' well-being. So can you recommend a tip from New Ways of Teaching on teachers' well-being while teaching remotely? A link to the tip will be shared in the chat.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you very much. Yes, of course. I have to mention to the teachers, would you mind going to the next slide, please? So I would like to encourage teachers to look after your well-being. So you have to invest time every day of your life, otherwise you will collapse, and trust me, you will collapse. So a teacher who have low well-being and experiencing high levels of stress will not perform in the best of their ability. So this is very important for you as a teacher, because you are a role model also for your students. So some tips that I would like to give you that I found through the New Ways of Teaching tips section is, the first one would be focus on your work-life balance. This is very, very important. Working in home office could be very difficult, very challenging, because it could be easier for us to say, I will finish later in the night. But no, we need to be very clear with us and with your colleagues about our working hours. And this is something that Nick mentioned. You have to be very focused about your working hours. Also, you have to be very clear with your family that despite you are at home and that probably you are mommy or daddy and they see you there, you are not that 100% available. You know, you are working as you were going to the school or the office. Assign a specific place in your home for home office. If you don't have a space like a room or something, you can design like a corner in your room for doing home office. Establish a routine. This is very important for your work-life balance. Establish a routine that makes you feel that you go to the school and you have time for your personal life. And another tip that I would like to give you is that find a hobby, find something that passionates you, find something that discovers something new. This will help you to disconnect from the work and have a personal time for yourself. For example, another tip would be relax. By relaxing, you can have a fresh mind and you can restart again, you know? So relax by listening to music, relax by doing some exercise, relax by reading. Probably you like to do yoga, you like to, you know, you can do that for you. And finally, and this is something that I added, it's work on your resilience skills. It is very important that you work on your resilience skills. Remember, resilience is like a muscle and you need to work out every day in order to increase it. So if you want to know more tips about this, about looking after your well-being, and other very interesting tips, you can go to the New Ways of Teaching website, and we will be leaving you the New Ways of Teaching tips for well-being in the chat box. And thank you very much, Alicia.
Thank you very much, Denise. So many ideas here, yeah, and so many tips shared. So thank you very much. Teachers will find them very, very useful. Now we will have our last guest of this roundtable. He's Ralph Grayson. Ralph is Education Service Manager at the British Council in Peru. Since joining the British Council, he has managed the organization's portfolio of activity in support of education and bilingualism in Peru. As part of the bilingualism support activity, his management has worked closely with the Ministry of Education in strengthening teachers' English language skills, as well as their empowerment by improving their pedagogical strategies. Ralph Grayson has worked in the world of ELT for more than 30 years, leading innovation and change projects in areas such as program implementation, training, online teaching, learning, among others. So our very warmest welcome to Ralph.
Thank you, Alicia. It's great to be in this launch event and to walk you through what happens a little bit in Peru.
Yeah, Ralph, as Education Service Manager, and I'm sure you can answer this question, is how are teachers in Peru? Denise has just shared the context in Mexico, becoming aware of new ways of teaching.
That's a very interesting question because Mexico and Peru, as well as other countries in the region, we share pretty much the same context. I will also like Denise, I will share some information which we collected from a piece of work we did with the Ministry of Education, precisely one of our main stakeholders, our main partners, working in public education. We did a piece of research as they delivered a strategy called Aprendo en Casa, Learn from Home, which included English language teaching, right? And of course, one of the things we plan to do is to monitor and assess, you know, the effectiveness of the strategy towards the end of last school year. And yeah, we identified more or less the same roadblocks that Denise was mentioning, right? The fact, for example, that here in Peru, pretty much the same, like 78% of the students access the content in the learn from home strategy from a smartphone or from a telephone, right? Or that 24%, close to 25% of the students that we involved in this piece of research did not simply have access to internet, right? And 42% had access to internet, but they declared it was insufficient. But the attitude that these students had was very, very positive. I mean, we found out from the not only from the questionnaires, the surveys, but also from focus groups, that that students were very positive about the English language content that the ministry was delivering. I clearly remembered, you know, one of the quotes that say that a student wrote in English. You know, when we asked for feedback, the student wrote in English, you know, and he said that, or she had said that she learned many things, but that she would like to learn more. And she said something like she wished there were more hours in the English classes, because he thought it was very important that English would open doors for this student, and he wrote that, or she wrote that in English, in the feedback. That was very moving for us. Anyway, one of the things that, as part of the recommendations of that report that we wrote for the ministry, was that the strategy in general should focus on 3 angles, right? Which is the curricular part, and the ministry, of course, looks at that, the structure of the curriculum and all this, monitoring and evaluation, which they constantly do. And as I said, we just took part in one of those elements. But one important element was also the support system for the teacher, right? The what we might say is continuous professional development, or the constant support that the teachers have. And so, just like in many other countries, we found ourselves in this problem that in the middle of the pandemic, how do we keep that moving? So how do we keep them engaged? How do we keep teachers engaged in their professional development? And the first thing that occurred to us at the British Council in Peru was to start sort of a community of practice, an online community of practice that worked on the basis of 2 things. One is regular contact, regular content delivered to the teachers, based, and the second thing was based on the resources, the wealth of resources that the British Council had, pretty much like New Ways of Teaching, So we have kept the same strategy now that we have a specific program for the Americas called New Ways of Teaching, and the engagement, for example, is done through, as I said, this campaigns that go out to teachers every 2 weeks, let's say, and those campaigns, or those messages that we send out to teachers, contain, let's say, a selection of content that we curate from the different sources that the British Council has available, right? Like New Ways of Teaching, Teaching English, etc., and some other ones we'll see today. And we sort of facilitate the content in Spanish, in some cases. If the content is in English, we guide teachers, for example, to using the online translation, for to understand the content that we deliver. And this is the reason why we do this is because we are well aware of the level of English that teachers manage in Peru. While some of them, can easily manage, a C1 or a C2 level, some others are, of course, at the other, on the other side of the spectrum, especially the ones that are new, the ones that have received limited opportunities for language development, etc. So these quarterly bulletins, are, let's say, disseminated through our networks. First of all, we have a network of around 2,800 teachers, with within our database, and those are the teachers that we keep permanent engagement with. And we invite all the time. We are inviting teachers to join the network. The second thing is, of course, as I mentioned, the Ministry of Education, which is one of the largest networks in the country, and the English team is super active, very cooperative, and every time we say, hey, this is useful, can you cascade, they immediately do the cascade effect with the network. And finally, teacher associations. We basically have 2 teacher associations in Peru, IATEFL Peru and TESOL Peru. And we also send, dedicated messages, direct messages to them so they cascade. We also, for many, many years, we also had a project, a wonderful project called Champion Teachers, which was also in many other countries in the Americas. And that truly became a network that really help us deliver our message. So once we send our messages to champion teachers, you can imagine how those champion teachers work in cascading. Those champion teachers have initiated networks in their communities. We see, for example, one in the south of Tacna, in the south of Peru, sorry, called an area called Tacna, where they have developed a network which is super active. There's others that have developed, you know, English teachers in Peru. They have developed, I don't know, teachers respond in Peru. I don't know, whatever the name is. But those champion teachers help us, you know, cascade even wider our messages, and that's how we have kept the engagement.
Thank you very much, Ralph. That's very, very useful information from teachers, yeah, all across the Americas, because situations are similar. And our next question is for you to share with us a practical resource, yeah, because there's a topic that's very interesting and you're very committed to it, which is the climate connection. Yeah? So how is New Ways of Teaching helping teachers preparing for COP26?
Yeah, that's also an important question. This is the year of COP26, and as part of the dissemination strategy of resources, we are telling teachers, you know, where to find these resources, these lesson plans, these podcasts, etc., interviews, guides, etc. Where to find them? Well, I can tell you, we can find them in the Climate Connection Hub, right? Which is going to be published in the chat box. If you click there in the Climate Connection Hub, you'll have a wealth of resources, just like New Ways of Teaching, to prepare your students for this important moment, which is the COP26, and that happens, if I'm not wrong, in November this year in the UK. And so as part of that, the British Council is also guiding teachers in telling them, you know, hey, prepare your students like this. These are some elements of reflection. This is a lesson plan about, you know, this particular area of climate connection, etc. And as I said, you can find all these resources in the Climate Connection Hub. I don't have much time, but I do have a special invitation to the teachers that are in our room today to start this, to start using these resources, okay? These lesson plans, these podcasts that you can use for listening activities that you can have in your classrooms. You can disseminate to your students so that they you facilitate, for example, the conversation within your groups of students, your groups of teachers about the importance of climate issues. I'd like to invite you to try this, and then drop me a line. My email was on the screen and probably can be shared in the chat box. You know, drop me a line to say, hey, I tried this activity, okay? I tried this activity. This is what I did. Here's some pictures, some whatever evidence you can send me, you know, and I would be very glad to have you back in October, you know, in our event in October that Alicia mentioned, to showcase your work. We would like teachers to show the results of the work you've done with these resources. And Climate Connection in October will be important because, you know, it's exactly the month before the big event in the UK. So try the activities, drop me a line. You have August and September to try them. Drop me a line and tell me how it went.
Thank you, Ralph. That's a great challenge for the teachers who are here with us today. And your email is on screen at the moment. So please send Ralph the evidence of the climate connection. Thank you, Ralph, again for joining the roundtable and for such wonderful ideas.
Thank you.
Now, just reminders that to sign up for the New Ways of Teaching newsletter. Again, this is a reminder for you to get all the materials, wealth of material, article, conference, calendar. Sign up to the New Ways of Teaching newsletter. The link will be shared in the chat. And last announcement, again, yeah, save the date for the coming webinars. A link to the events calendar, it's in the chat, but if you go to the landing page of New Ways of Teaching, everything we mentioned today, you'll have links to all the different resources, articles, research papers, and calendars. So please register to our coming events. And one more thing is that a link is shared for the attendance. It's an attendance sheet for you to complete with your personal information, some feedback, so you then will get the certificate in your inbox. And now, this is the time for questions and answers. That will be moderated by Graham Stanley. So Graham Stanley, over to you to share the questions the audience has shared with us for our spectacular roundtable here today.
Thank you very much, Alicia. Thank you very much to our panelists. If you do have a question, there's still time for it to be answered. Please put it in the question and answer section. I'm going to scroll back up to the beginning though, because we do have some questions that were asked right at the beginning. And I'm going to call upon our first guest, our guest of honor, Nick Perkins, who is talking about the podcast, because I think Nick would be in a good position to answer the first question. I am going to combine two questions. And Nick, let me just put you on screen so people can see you. We had Ildefonso Gustavo Diaz Sandoval ask about the Lexile approach and the best way to teach a language. I'm going to open that up and sort of ask you, Nick, whether in your experience of putting together the podcast, was there any particular approaches or new approaches that came to the forefront when it came to teaching and learning English these days because of the new ways of teaching that people are doing? But also want to combine it with, if you can answer also from Andres from Cuba, who was talking about the best way to combine effectively learning technologies in the new educational context, because I suspect that comes into an approach to teaching and learning as well. So over to you, Nick, if you want to try and answer those questions.
Yeah, absolutely. I think what became evident very quickly as I was interviewing teachers was there is no one approach which is favoured over others. People sometimes refer to the age we're in of language teaching as the post-methodology age, because we've been through so many different methodologies. I mean, I'm almost 50 and I can remember probably 4 or 5 that were the next big thing in my career. And they all became the old big thing as the new big thing came in. But what seems to be happening now is that teachers are taking the best of lots of different approaches. I remember talking to Andres from Uruguay, who works, he's actually a teacher on the Plan Ceibal project, which I know the British Council supports in Uruguay, which is the sort of beaming in of remote teachers into a classroom. And I think it's a great example of this sort of hybrid post-methodology approach where you've got a local classroom teacher who is supporting the sort of day-to-day classroom management. You've got a remote teacher being beamed in, using different methodologies according to what's being taught at the time. And then the pandemic also got the parents involved as well. So Andres was saying, you know, there was a lot of, if we want to look at specific sort of teaching methodologies, there was a lot of grammar translation started happening when the parents became involved because they were asking basic sort of vocabulary and language questions so that they could understand what their children are doing. Alicia also in her episode, Alicia, our host today, spoke, if you really want to hear somebody talking about sort of hybrid approaches to education, Alicia spoke a lot about hybrid approaches to education as well, especially related to differentiated instruction. And I think that's something else which would be a common theme of teachers actually differentiating between their students in the same classroom with regard to what they learn and how they learn it at which point in time. So I would say those are some things to look out for in the podcasts. And with regard to the question on combining learning technologies, I think the best thing to say is I would suggest listening to Alicia Artusi's episode and also Tania Esquivel from Mexico. And they both talked about the need and the ways in which they've been combining learning technologies. It's quite hard because I'm trying to find a really concrete, short and concise response. And it's hard to do that because what I was hearing again and again are that people are becoming freer to allow themselves to evolve with the times and respond to needs as they occur. So, for example, Tanya said that when she started running the school that she runs, which is a public institution in Mexico City, they had a platform, but it soon became evident that that platform wasn't going to be particularly useful. And I think this touches on some of the things that Denise said and some of the things that Ralph said about access to technology, whether it's internet access or bandwidth if you do have access, or just not having a device with which to access. So Tanya said, you know, she realized that doing this on a computer wasn't feasible for many of her students. So what she had to do with her teachers was work out which of them could use the technology on a computer screen, which of them had their own mobile device so they could use it at any time on a mobile device, and which of them had to depend on doing this through their parents and be very adaptable on the fly as they found out which of these learning technologies was available. So I don't think there's necessarily a best way of combining the learning technologies. I think there's the best practice is to do an audit of your students' access to different platforms or different devices, and based on what you find, you can adapt your own policy. And I think there is no one correct answer, and that's what you'll hear again and again as you listen to the podcasts. Lots of people have found lots of solutions, and each of those solutions is equally valid within the local context that they were discovered and applied.
Thank you very much, Nick, for that very comprehensive answer. I should say I'm going to ask Denise the next question, but I should say that not all of the podcasts are actually available at this very moment, but they will be released in the weeks to come. So Nick's given you a taster of a number of those podcasts that you should watch out for when they're released. And before I ask you a question, Denise, I'm just going to mention that some of the links that were put in the chat right at the beginning were not correct. I've actually corrected them and put in links further on. So if you do find there's a link there that doesn't lead to what you were looking for, if you scroll back down, then you will find the tip that you want. So Denise, I'm going to ask a question now and ask you to unmute that has been, I'm going to combine two questions actually, one from Catherine and one from Yannette. I don't know where they're from, but they both asked interesting questions there about CPD. So Catherine was asking about what activities and actions can contribute to our CPD. It's a very general question, but I think given the context of what you were talking about, we can answer that. Plus, Yannette, who actually I see is from the University of Artemisa in Cuba, was talking about online teaching degrading students' learning. So I think she's a bit worried whether there's going to be something missing from switching to online rather than face-to-face. And in particular, she was asking about this new way of teaching and whether it is compatible with the communicative approach in a face-to-face class. So perhaps you could answer that first and say how maybe teachers can find out more related to their CPD about becoming more communicative with online teaching, if that sounds all right.
Yes, of course. Thank you very much for your interest, teachers. Yeah, CPD is something that you can work on every day. You know, CPD is related to you finding like your strengths, your your skills, and you trying to go further them. So I'm sorry that I'm going to do a commercial here from the British Council, but but there's a free resource from the British Council that is called self-assessment tool, that it helps you to know where you're located in the CPD framework that we designed. So this helps you to understand which areas do you have to improve, or which areas are you good enough that probably you don't have to work on. So I think it's very important for us as teachers to be very conscious about our continuous professional development, because this is the key for us to succeed, to go further, you know, to help our students to improve our best. So you can work on your CPD by coming to these webinars. For example, this is working on your CPD right now. So congratulations, teachers, because you are looking after your continuous professional development. And if you would like to have more information about the self-assessment tool, please, Graham, I don't know if you can share my email, please, so we can send you more information about it. So about the question from the Artemisa University in Cuba that you mentioned, I would say that it's very important that we know how to combine technological skills, but also with ground skills, like in the face-to-face, you know, because at this time, most of the people think, oh no, but you have to do everything digital. Probably not, because you have also, as we already mentioned in the webinar, you have to take into consideration your students' background, your students' profile. So I would suggest, teacher, that you be reflective about your students' background, about the profile, the context, so you can be aware of what are the best strategies for you. As Nick mentioned, there is not a good one, but there are many, and which is the best for you to implement with your students. So I would say you need to look like digital resources, but also if you think that there are some resources like traditional in the face-to-face that you could apply by, you know, like in your sessions, I would say like go ahead, because it's not a good one. It's a combination of many resources. So I will invite you to combine both. And thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that answer, Denise. That was very, very useful, very interesting, I'm sure. I'm going to switch over to Ralph now. And Ralph, the latest question, the last one that was being posted that I spotted, is from Liz Angelica. Now, Liz asks the question, what types of activities we can put into practice to increase the motivation in higher education students during these pandemic times, and she's particularly interested in using ICT. I would expand that to say, do you have any suggestions for teachers to increase motivation during using this type of online teaching and learning? Is there anything there that has struck you as being particularly interesting or important?
Yeah, it was interesting. It's interesting in the sense that this person that asked the question is focusing on higher education. In Peru, we recently developed a project with a number of public Peruvian universities, and it was precisely about that. It was precisely about online learning, online teaching, and as we delivered the project, we worked with different teachers, a number of teachers, I think there were about 1,000 teachers, across all the universities we worked with. There was a lot of appetite in motivation, precisely. How do I motivate my students in the online teaching? And that particular question, is linked to many other aspects in the project that we worked with, in the sense that we really had to work on a mental shift in teachers, that were doing online work. And one of the first mental changes we had to work on was on the fact that these teachers were under the concept that they would have to deliver their lessons pretty much the same way they delivered them in a face-to-face format, but on a synchronous platform like Zoom. So the traditional session was becoming, something like I deliver my content, over Zoom, and I expect my students to follow me, and I ask questions, etc., etc., etc. Pretty much like what were used to doing in the face-to-face world. And then one of the questions we posed, for example, was, okay, that's fine, but how do you cope with the lack of connectivity? Which, Nick mentioned, Denise mentioned, Liliana, I think, mentioned as well, and which is very common in many of our countries. If you have such low connectivity, how come you are asking students to connect them, to be connected, for long periods of time to lessons that are live, in what you call video conferencing? And that made them think. So I think one of the key starting points here is for the teacher to reflect. If they have problems, for example, with motivation, I think is get that, reflection, capacity for reflection going, to find out the solutions to their problems. Pretty soon, for example, they found out that there were a number of tools that they wanted to explore to motivate their students, something like they wanted to know more about like gamification, online questionnaires and all this. So we focused on that particular need, and we asked them to try different activities and to say, we gave them pointers and say, we're not telling you to use this. We're not telling you to use these tools. We are suggesting you try them, analyze them, see if they work for your context. If you are in a context where students have connectivity, then you can use these sort of tools. If you're in a context where connectivity is low, your students are connecting from a telephone, from a cell phone, then try not to use those. Try to use low-tech, applications, low-tech resources, and things like this. So I think that was key. And then we received the feedback. We collected feedback from teachers and said, thank you very much. I hadn't thought of that. I hadn't really reflected on what I was demanding from your students, what technical demands I was having from to my students. And now I can think more carefully about what to tell them, and they are much more motivated to participate. Not only the traditional way I was doing it, but I'm trying to, find ways to motivate them and to respond in the classroom and to keep them engaged in the classroom. So that was a very nice experience. Thank you for the question.
Thank you, Ralph. Thank you, everybody. We've overrun slightly, so I want to thank everybody for sticking with us and for coming and listening to our panel talk about new ways of teaching today. That brings us to a close. We very much hope you'll join us for the next events. Remember, it's on the last Thursday of every month, apart from December, at the same time. So without further ado, thank you very much, and we'll hope to see you very soon. Bye.